Okay, so let's get started. We have significantly more people joining. Thanks for everybody who joined us and the dozens that are coming in. I want to be respectful for everybody's time, so I'm just going to get right to it. If at some point you can't hear me well, raise your hand, but I think we're good on that. So, by the way, this is recorded. So if you want the recording afterwards and the link, please be sure to let us know. Now, this webinar started when we started seeing that whenever we speak with stakeholders, C-level executives, and people who manage the companies, we saw that sometimes the CFO would very much get excited, but the CTO wouldn't, or a board of directors couldn't see the point of doing R&D funding where the rest of the founding team was really excited about to do it. So we started doing a series of webinars that were webinars for investors, board members, for CEOs, and we're building a series of webinars dedicated for each person and their team. And the things that are interesting for you as a CFO are not interesting for you as a CTO. And what we're trying to do is basically make sure that a company has to align whether or not they want to do R&D funding or not. And R&D funding has to align with all the founders and all the management team's vision. If the CTO is not, if you are a CTO at the moment or as a CTO not excited about doing R&D funding, A, they're wrong, but biased, but B, this won't work well. And miscommunication on the vision would lead to failure in going to grants or failure to even start, even though it is possibly a great opportunity for you. And you as a CTO, or if you're another member of a company that is now watching it, please forward it to your CTO. Let them ask us questions. Let them do their own research. By all means, you can contact us, but you can go and there's plenty of research and material that's out there outside. The QR code on the right is for you to go and scan a meeting with either me or my marketing director, Sasha. And the point there, just get out your phone, open your camera, put it on the actual QR code, scan it, and book a meeting with us. For anyone who is going to book a meeting with me by the end of the webinar and ends up signing, they will get an additional free month that's on us. That is worth many thousands of dollars of service. So without further ado, basically what I'm trying to say is you as CTOs or people presenting it to CTOs have to understand that they know what is R&D funding and what they use it for. Again, that's me. If you were unable to book a meeting, then we can talk. My Canly.com, Yoav Siegel, or YOAV at eaglepointfunding.com. Email me before the webinar ends or book a meeting before the webinar ends. And if we end up working together, there's going to be an additional month. What are we expected to today? One, you'll be able to get a very good understanding on federal grants and federal R&D funding. And then how are you as a CTO or somebody showing this to a CTO should assess federal R&D funding. Now, what you'll see is that for 2021, $142 billion are going to be awarded on R&D, where about 30 to 60 is going to be awarded for private companies. The companies who are going to get those R&D contracts won't have to do equity sharing. There's not going to be intervention from the federal agents on their work. They will keep all their IP rights, and they're going to be working with probably the largest consortiums and not corporations, but agencies on the planet. So, and there's possibly follow-on contracts and pilot programs that they might have, and a stable budget that's not going to fluctuate compared to the private sector. So at a minimum, this is a good R&D and revenue source for the engineering team, specifically talking to the CTOs, but also for the company. In 2019, $3.5 billion were awarded for 5,504 companies just in SBIR funding alone. We're going to talk about that program. A lot of people say, oh, it's only DoD stuff, but NASA, the National Science Foundation, and Department of Energy have each awarded hundreds of companies in funding that's anywhere from $100, $150, $250,000 for a very basic step, and then millions of dollars in prototype contracts. Let's move into basically further down. You'll see that funding agencies can be anywhere from the Department of Transportation, National Science Foundation, NOAA, yes, the Department of Defense, NASA, Homeland Security, DARPA, the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, all these agencies, U.S. Air Force, NIST, all these agencies are funding R&D programs. To you as a CTO, this is something that is extremely important when you're factoring where and how are you going to fund the R&D and development. Just type of industries and types of tech that are being funded. Yes, some people are saying, well, there's buzzwords, and if I'm not AI, I won't be able to get funded. That is absolutely false. There's topics anywhere from defense and autonomous systems and energy and cybersecurity and materials, more and more topics. You don't have to work with me. You don't have to decide to basically align in how we're doing it. But I strongly suggest that you take a hard look on the technology that you have and compare it to what's available entirely in funding. We're going to talk about how we're doing it, but there's many ways that can fit people in when they pursue their funding. There's two types of investment. One is either an agency that is looking for a problem that they're facing to be solved, or seed money for private industries. Both of them are relevant for you as a small business tech company, as a startup, and as somebody that might be looking for a client or commercialization. The way agencies work, and again, here's the QR code. Take out your phone now and scan the meeting and book a meeting to get one additional month of working with us if we end up signing. So, how does this work with an agency? They're going to face some challenge. It could be a logistical, it could be programming, it could be financial management. They would be looking for their problem to be solved. Afterwards, they're going to post an opportunity, generally known as an RFP, a request for proposal, that's going to say, we need R&D solving a specific problem that we have. They're going to see, based on the proposals that get sent back to them, what is out there in the market. Sometimes you'll see something that is called an RFI, a request for information, or a request for proposal. Both of these is to understand what is happening in the market and which should we work with and which should we choose. Afterwards, the agency is going to invest in the most promising companies in a competitive process. So there is a salesmanship process happening there. You as CTOs know that it's not necessarily the most advanced tech that gets funded. It's not the most advanced technology or the most um, not the most complicated or not the most sophisticated technology that ends up being funded or end up having clients, but the most sellable, the most persuasive, the technology that is able to reach a market or fit a need better, it might have better chances there. They will invest in the most promising companies. They will then see how you perform on that actual R&D project. And we've had entire webinars talking about how should you structure it? Should you oversell? What should be the milestones? How do you actually decide what are going to be the goals and how to perform? But then if you're actually able to perform on what you're saying you will, then they will become an early adopter or customer, or let you even pilot with your technology on their kind of let you practice on their backs. So these are definitely stuff that aligns with what you're trying to do as a company on the fundamental level. You're trying to get funding for your R&D to develop the tech that you are providing, and then see if the person who just invested in you might also be interested in becoming a client. So this is the steps to actually reach commercialization can work with certain types of agencies within the federal government. Let's talk about small business innovation research. A phase one, a proof of concept, could be anywhere from 50 to 250,000. So definitely make sure that what you need aligns with the agency. Afterwards, a prototype can be anywhere from 300, 500 to $1.6 million for a prototype contract, where you actually have to show that you're not able to build a product, but actually the idea works on prototype. This is something that you can signal back to investors. This is something that you can do to further develop what the company is already building. And then there's phase three, where agencies are genuinely interested in helping in commercialization. It's outside of the CIBR program, but $3.5 billion are awarded annually to companies today. So the proof is on you to explain why you're not doing R&D funding instead of putting the burden on the government itself. It always surprises me that people are so savvy when it comes to certain types of investments, but they never think of using R&D funding that is non-dilutive and keeps their IP in control in part of their strategy, at least in the long term. Other agencies are broad agency announcements where funding can be anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Awards can be up to $65 million, and they're very broad. It might be concepts that are fully deployable within the next 2 months, or concepts that are at the back of your head and they're still very, very raw and concept worthy. All those levels between them, from TRL 1 to TRL 7, are available there. And it's a fact that 97% of the R&D budget is in broad agency analysis, but that's a completely different beast. Another thing, and this is again speaking to stuff that is supposed to be tailored for you CTOs, or if you're sending it to CTOs, you're always concerned on what are you going to do with the R&D staff, whether it's just you or several engineers that you have. Salaries of R&D staff that is working on that proposal or on that solicitation can be factored in there. So if you're worried, wait, I'm hiring engineers and I don't want to spread them too thin. If they're going to be working 30% of the time on the project you're developing, 30% of the salaries can be factored in the budget. Salaries of AI engineers in California are not going to be calculated the same as a mechanical engineer in Minnesota. No disrespect. It's just the market prices them differently at the moment. You can hire subcontractors. You can buy and acquire instruments and materials for what you're doing if you need further experimentations, facilities, and administration. But this is specifically tailored for you when it comes to how you allocate the work of your engineers. So if you're worried, the question that always comes up, and we're going to bring it, is bandwidth, but you can factor it in their own salaries. You've even had situations where, let's say you're applying for $1.5 million project, and then you have to hire 2 additional engineers for it. Then you can say, once I get this award, I will need an additional 400 of engineers hours a month. I will use $300,000 for the next 3 months to hire these engineers. Now, remind you that this is non-dilutive, remind you that you can leverage this. And the reason I'm saying it is because the Department of Energy saw that a company winning a phase 1 CIBR is doubling their chances of getting follow-on funding. A Milken Institute found that you can up to 8 times leverage what you get in R&D funding compared to private sector funding. So if you're going to be able to get in the next 2 years $1.5 million in R&D funding from the public sector, you'd be able to get up to more than $8 million in the next 5+ years in private sector funding. Actually having the money to do continuous R&D work is a step to keep the company alive and on the path to exit, commercialization, or whatever the strategy is. But do not tell me that CIBRs are a distraction before you've taken a look at these stats. Now, let's take a look to basically the reason why dozens and dozens of people are here now today, and hopefully taking out their phones and scanning the QR code here to the right and booking a meeting as soon as possible. Because if we end up working together, if you book the call from here, you'll be able to get an additional month on working with us if we end up working together. Let's move to the next slide. Basically, the 6 steps I think you as a CTO or as a CTO that you're going to be showing it to him. And I know I might sound too aggressive or speaking too fast, but the point is, I think a CTO should discuss and understand, are they eligible? What is the funding amount that's available and what they need? What is the project length? Can they align it with their bandwidth? What are the deliverables they have to send out? And what is the relevancy? These are part of the core structures that we are doing a part of our professional department when they're sitting with a technical team from your side. When we go and sit with our companies and we're trying to understand which projects are relevant for them, these are part of the questions that we're asking. And you as a CTO need to at least understand it when a company goes and discusses it with you. Let's go talk about the first step. Is my company eligible? Are you eligible, and for what types? Now, first, let's talk about CIBR's Small Business Innovation Research. In order to do that, you need to be able to A, have a company that is less than 500 people, B, the majority ownership of the company has to be at least 51% US owned. It's fine. We're going to talk about VCs. So, said differently, 51% or more of the company has to be owned by US residents. It doesn't have to be citizens, it could be green card holders, but more than 51% has to be privately owned by US citizens. Broad agency announcements, Allied countries can apply as well. Sorry, North Korea, you can't apply for broad agency announcements. And you can do that even if there's VC funding. You can do that if you're a 503 C corporation. If you're in a company that is larger than 500 employees, that's broad agency announcements, you can apply. There's Israeli companies, European companies, Canadian companies that apply for these R&D grants and contracts. The main issue there is understanding what is your competitive edge compared to US-based companies. Again, if you're an international company applying for them, we'll have to discuss, but you're still eligible to apply for 97% of the R&D budget in the US. OTAs are other transaction authorities, which is the way for the Department of Defense to have basically faster route procurement. It's a bit complicated, but I think you should know that you need to be able to know that there is something called other transaction authority. You could operate on that and apply for it while working with the Department of Defense. Effects of VC funding. VC funding is a tricky question because there's a question on who controls the IP. Does the VC have control over the IP or not? Because what they're trying to prevent here is a situation where North Korea funds and creates a fake VC that's sitting somewhere, and then that VC invests in companies, and then taxpayer dollars are then moved to Martians or North Koreans or other enemies of the United States. So the point here when we're working with VC funded companies is if we're applying for SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, is that less than 51% of it is owned by the VC. B, who has control and ownership of the IP. If you as a CTO know that you have control and ownership and there's only the VC is a minority stakeholder, it is fine. The next question that you should ask is, where is my R&D happening? Is it domestic or not domestic? And this becomes a little bit more tricky, it does affect. So if you have 100% of the R&D happening outside the United States, you can apply for broad agency announcements. If the main work that is happening on the SBIR project is happening in the US and the primary investigator, the person in charge of doing the research, is in the US and is a US permanent resident, you can apply for SBIRs and you can go ahead and take on that project. So even if you don't remember what I'm saying, just remember that these are some of the effects that they have. So it's important to know where the actual R&D is going to be happening. For people who are interested, what happens if I'm using technology that is happening outside? Or I'm cooperating with a European company or something like that. Well, you can cooperate with a European company. It's okay to use technologies that you don't own. You just have to prove that what you are developing is of need, cutting edge, and what you're using isn't the main idea. They want to know that if they're funding you as a company, you as a CTO need to know that let's say the $1.5 million that you're going to get in the next year, what you're developing with that is happening in the US. If there's no further questions on that, I'm more than happy to move forward. Let's move to how much funding. So there's three basic questions you need to ask there. One, what is your actual R&D roadmap? If there's no R&D whatsoever and you guys are already commercialized and you have distributors, then R&D funding may not be the 100% fit for you, only if the end game for you is actually having a contract with a government agency. So if you have a solution that is commercialized but needs to have adaptations to fit agency servers, or your solution needs to work on completely different data sets, or the material that you have to develop has to adjust to different requirements and specifications that a government agency needs, then that falls within an R&D work. But you need to know that if the R&D is happening in the next 20 years, then maybe it's not best to take on a solicitation that is looking for you to do commercialization in the next 6 months. How much do you actually need in these 2 years? I think startups is a bit hard for them to understand what's their 15-year roadmap. But I will ask companies, and if you'll take out your phone and scan the QR code to the right and actually speak with me, I will ask you, how much do you need or how much you're looking for in the next 2 years, and what do you need it for? That's a primary question. And at the bottom, of course, it's not laws of physics because I'm not smart enough, but at the bottom, that's kind of my rule of thumb. Take how much funding you need in the next 2 years, minus the cost of development, plus what you think you'll be able to get if you get awarded and you're actually able to deliver. That is gross estimate what you should be looking for on how much funding you will be able to get. You as a CTO are probably saying, or even board members or investors or other stakeholders in the company are asking themselves, well, how much funding are we actually going to get? And that's a great question, because you don't want to take on a project that's going to cost you $5 million in 5 years of development and only getting 250,000 from the government. That's the rule of thumb on how much I think you should factor in if doing R&D funding with the government is successful for you. Take how much funding you need in the 2 years, minus how much it will cost you to develop it, plus follow on and private sector funding. That is what we're starting to see as an current pattern. So this comes to calculating the cost of working with us, but this is also calculating the work and effort on doing R&D funding as a whole. Now, you don't have to believe me, Yoav, he's just a salesman, I don't trust him. That's perfectly fine. Then take a look at what the Department of Energy is saying. This is not me. I copied it from them from a slide that they have. And they're essentially saying, with us, you'll see that 200,000 in a phase one, and then you have the prototype contracts, phase two, that you have a million, a million point one, and then up to $3 million in a phase two, and then move into commercialization and final touches R&D. There's no actual limit there. So you have to factor all these things into the equation. So yes, that might exclude some of the companies here on working or not, because they need I've spoken with a company that they need, I think, $8 million just to build a very basic proof of concept. And at the moment, that was not right for them. What I think you need to calculate is how much funding does it cost me to do a prototype, a proof of concept, but then how much can I get on the follow-on funding and commercialization assistance? These are things to factor in there. Let's take a look at how much time it takes you. Let's take it how much time R&D projects are going to last, because CTOs, the technical and engineering team, as the company, need to align and understand what is the length. So for cyber programs, phase one's proof of concept can be 3 to 5 months when it comes to reporting, building a very basic, either a paper that explains why the concept should work, or a very, very early experiment showing the results. A phase two, a prototype, a reporting period can be 12 to 24 months. Software moves differently than hardware, but these are definitely things to keep in mind. So if you're worried that I'm going to take your time for a shiny $500,000 project, but you will have no sleep for the next 30 months, understand that it changes based on project. You can basically design the milestones in a way that doesn't cause you to crash. And broad agency announcements can be anywhere from 6 months to 5 years. So this is something to understand when it comes to understanding what would be your bandwidth, understanding how do you structure that with other projects. Let's take a look at, do you have the bandwidth? I don't know how many people are here are actual CTOs or people in charge of the technical writing, but you should go and ask yourselves the difference. And this is specifically not for every R&D stage you're going to do. This is specific for R&D contracts. There's a difference between writing versus development. And the reason I'm saying that is because there's a part of writing, whether you write with us or you write it with yourselves, where you're writing the proposal saying, hey, dear NASA, dear Department of Energy, dear Department of Defense, here's why I think my technology matters. And this is what I'll do if I'll get awarded. And here's why we're fit. This takes significantly less time. Also, when you're actually at a stage of development, you're not doing it for free. You're not spending money and engineering time in your focus before you got paid. I know companies that have been waiting for their phase twos because they've been awarded, but before they actually got the funds to continue research, they're not working on it. They're waiting for funding to arrive, then they start the reporting period. So there's a completely different set of bandwidth and time allocations once you get funded compared to private sector, where you might have to build a demo or develop something before you actually see cash from it. Factoring engineering time, again, it is different for a phase one, the proof of concept, where it could be very, very simple, to a prototype, to actually doing commercialization. And then how do you balance existing projects? Again, this depends on the milestones. This depends on what stage you are as a company. We would do the best of our work to help you describe the milestones and structure the solicitation in a way that doesn't burn you out. If you tell us, listen, we have 4 different projects and we need to not lose our heads if we actually get awarded, then we'll have to have a discussion. How would we want to structure it? Do you want to actually do a blitz and do something for 3 months that you know you can deliver, or you want to space it out? Again, you have to understand that you can factor salaries of R&D staff. You can hire more engineers and technical staff for these projects. Next, what are deliverables? Now, this is, again, take out your phone, scan the QR code, and book a meeting with us. And if we end up working together and you book a meeting this webinar, then we would have an additional month that's you'll get on working with us on us. What are deliverables, or what deliverables? There are different type of things that you need to actually develop for an agency, but it depends on the phase 1s and 2s. You won't have to build a space rocket, or you won't have to build a fully functioning platform and data model just on a phase 1. Phase 1s and 2s and 3s are different, and they're expecting different deliverables. Sometimes you tell the agency what they should expect from the prototype contract, what is realistic. And we would even tell a company, if you want to actually maximize the chances of winning, don't oversell and don't undersell. Don't go and say, on my phase 2s, I'm going to be able to build a Mars colony, because you won't. You might think you'll be able to win, but then you'll actually fail. And the end game is to have a working, commercializable product. A pilot contract, many agencies, and the Air Force, I think, is pioneering in this. The Air Force is saying, go win a phase 2, and afterwards, pilot your technology with me, have access to my facilities, have access to some of my data sets, have access to some of the materials or the needs, maybe even fail, but let us get exposed to what's out there, let us do amazing work, and let us stay at the cutting edge, instead of fully commercializing technology 5 years and then only reaching to us. And you'll see a lot of amazing agencies really interested in working in cutting edge companies. That's what pilot contracts, B2G, sometimes you'll actually have to deliver an actual product there, but that's a long time coming. Some agencies want you to do the R&D, and they're not going to become a client. National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, many times their projects are not for them to acquire. It's not a B2G. The Department of Energy can't essentially be a customer for you, but they do want you to perform the R&D as well, and that's going to be show us that the prototype works. Also, it's decided on a case by case. Sometimes, again, you'll have to persuade the agency on what are the right milestones that you'll actually have to build. And IP. As a CTO and as a company, there's a great concern on what is going to be my IP risk. In non-dilutive funding, there's no IP risk. And we would work with every single company in reading through the solicitations and understanding what are they actually looking for, what are actually the requirements. And there are situations where an agency is going to ask for code. Sometimes they'll ask for source code or ability to go and use it afterwards. We would go and raise a hand very loudly and say, hey, here's what we're looking for. Here's what they're looking for. Do you think this is something that you want to go forward or not? We take extra care in understanding what is going to be the IP requirements. 99% of the solicitations that I've seen while doing this has no IP risk, and they'll even tell you that for the first phase and phase 2, don't share anything proprietary. Only after we've established a relationship and we have a working contract and a program that's built for the next year, then we'll start discussing that. So 99% of solicitations and agencies do a whole lot of work, and they don't have rights over your IP. Again, pilot programs, you'll see that the XX Search, the Defense Innovation Unit, NASA, AFWERX, Army Applications Lab, all these amazing agencies are looking to pilot with you and actually be exposed to new technologies and new applications at their own risk. Let's go to the final step, and then before we do Q&A, let's take a look at how do you understand relevancy as a rule of thumb. What you'll see here is the golden matrix or the secret matrix, and what you'll see here is you should ask yourself a very simple question. How relevant is it? And that is, how much is the funding amount? And then how specific is the project? If you're an AI company that does computer vision, you should not do, I don't think so. If you don't have the resources and that's your specialty, I don't think that you should go after natural language processing if it's not within your bandwidth or some sort of priority. And if you're only going to get $5,000 for it. And then there's a question on time. So if this is a project that has less than $100,000 and is going to be paid out in the next 10 years, just say no. If you think that you're going to be able to get 250,000 in the next 6 months, that this is something that you need, consider it based on your goals and see how it aligns with the longer term program that we've discussed so far. Then if there's $5 million of R&D funding that's available, but it's available in the next 4 years, maybe you should engage in it or start working on it now, but know that this is something that you're going to play out in the next 4 years or as the company grows. And then you have, if it's funding that's more than 150,000 and it's happening in the next 2 years or less, I think you should assign a program investigator, seriously consider working it or contacting us. Here you see that lovely smiley face. And that is the time for me to remind you again to take out your phones, scan the QR code, book a call with us if you want to get an additional month of working with us if we work together. Last, kind of the last slide before we move to further sections, pitfalls. Pitfalls goes in 3 ways. Now, it's not your sole responsibility as a CTO, but at the end of the day, this is an R&D contract, and you will either be a point of contact or this is something that you will supervise in one way or another. You have to make sure that infrastructure preparation and applying both fit. Infrastructure means that you have the permits and registrations to SAM.gov account, Cage Code, a DUNS number, a PAMS. All these agencies and platforms have their own requirements to register and make sure that you can submit your actual proposal, get announcements, and then actually get the funding amount. We do that, and we make sure that we even ask from our clients the login details. So we make sure you actually apply on time. You'd be surprised how many people lose by submitting too late. We try, and this AFWORK cycle that we're working on right now, we're trying to submit a month before the deadline because we're expecting the system to crash. So make sure the infrastructure is right. I know you have amazing tech and I know you have funding and you'd be a great fit for NASA, but if you're not registered for the platform to actually submit it, you're not going to see the money. Let's talk about preparation. Preparation means reading the actual solicitation, understanding your strong points compared to what the agency is looking for. When we talk about applying, I'm talking about systematic and strategic manner, not just, oh, I wrote a technical part that was 25 pages long, even though they told me to do a 25 slide deck, but I didn't listen because my tech is awesome. So both in infrastructure preparation and applying, I don't have a lot of time going into it, but these are the things to make sure that you avoid. We obviously believe in multiple submissions, so a part of applying is making sure that you're constantly looking for more solicitations and applying for them. Let's take the final step before some stats about us. How do you keep focus? I really think every time somebody tells me that R&D funding isn't aligning with them, I think many times they won't have a clear idea on where they're trying to get with their company. And that is because if you have 5,500 companies being awarded on cyber programs alone every year, if you have $3.5 billion, the responsibility and ability to find relevant research projects for your company, if your company actually has tech and R&D, it is happening. Now, you shouldn't go after R&D programs that are a distraction, but done right, R&D funding should align with your current and future R&D roadmap, at least in the next 2 years. We make sure that we don't onboard companies that is going to be a distraction for them. We make sure that we find the most relevant R&D programs and try to see what is a company actually interested in developing. But done right, R&D funding can help you focus. It can help you in fundraising. It can help you in R&D. So if you're interested on seeing if this is relevant for you, if you don't think that I'm just full of it and this hasn't been of value to you, feel free to scan the QR code, book a call with us, and possibly and get an additional month if we work together. Just to show you some of our winners, we've had AI facial recognition, drone-based data management, smart wearables, live streaming, carbon nanotube technologies have won either from 50,000 to 750,000 based on their goals and their roadmaps. How do you actually win federal grants? So you need to go and say, who cares about your tech? What is actually groundbreaking in the technology that you're developing? This is something that we work in the onboarding process and understand what's unique about you. Are you an evolutionary technology and you're 5% better or 5% worse than the market? Or you're actually doing something that is substantial? Why does the market care? Are you actually doing something that is concept, or do you have a letter of intents, memorandums of understanding, active clients, pilots? And why should the agency care is critical. I know that CTOs think the fact that they're saying that their tech is awesome automatically means that they're going to get awarded. It's not. You need to explain to the person on the other side who's reading through hundreds and thousands of pages of solicitations, understanding why do you get funding. Now, you need to explain to the agency that right now existing research is able to do A, you're able to do B, B is better and more important. And if you actually get awarded, you might be able to get to C, which really matters because the agency hasn't been able to solve their challenges, or it might mean that the agency is funding groundbreaking level stuff. Engage in multi-submission strategy is the statistical way to maximize your chances of winning. You don't go on one date and expect to get married. You don't go and speak with one investor and expect to get an immediate fundraiser. So in the same way that you go after as many investors as possible until you find the best fit, and then you work with them until you date the amount of people that are relevant, and then to find the spouse for you, the same way engage in multiple submissions, the same way you would try to persuade multiple clients before you have somebody that actually chooses to work with you. What to expect and working with us, and now is the time to start sending questions that I'll be able to answer in a second. What to expect in working with us. If you are going to take out your phone, scan the QR code, book a call with me or Sasha from this webinar before this webinar ends, then we end up deciding that we want to work together, you can afford and you want to work with us, that has both an upfront cost and a success fee. We will introduce you within no later than 3 days with the professional department. We will assign a grant consultant and project manager to be working with you for a minimum of 9 months. And then we'll build a step-by-step strategic plan for the funding opportunities we're going to go after together and help you both find and apply for them and navigate through those every single step. We want to work with you, and we hope you'll write with us anywhere from 5 to 10 solicitations on average in the initial term, but we will not restrict on the amount of solicitations. Our upfront cost isn't low. We're definitely not low in the industry. However, we've never restricted our clients on the amount of solicitations we went after. So if you're thinking this is a priority, if you think that you want to write more, if you have the bandwidth for it, then by all means, we will do definitely more than 10 if there are solicitations available and you're ready to do it. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to meet the rest of your team and the company. So in the meantime, I'll answer some Q&As. This is the last slide. This would be your last chance to scan the QR code and book a meeting, or email me at yoav@eaglepointfunding.com, or go to calendly.com/yoavseagle. Book a meeting with us by the end of the webinar, and you will be able to get an additional month on me if we end up working together. Okay, I see Jordan, thank you for that. How to identify if an SBIR listing is for R&D funding. Basically, SBIRs are R&D projects. So Small Business Innovation Research is the program Rishav. This is the program that is actually designed to fund you, for R&D funding, essentially. And each RFP, request for proposal, or broader Z announcements, are going to say what are they looking for. Johan, you're doing the grant writing. This is the hardest step for us to execute on. Johan, yes, we do the grant writing. We do, however, need your help in understanding your technology. We do need you to share with us what is the business plan. We do need you to help us in all these things. So if the grant writing is difficult, many times we will help you have guiding questions on how to write it, how to phrase situations. We will even help you better phrase between different agencies because they're looking for different things if we're doing different projects. So we're helping you understand what are the R&D projects, and then we help you in writing every single step of the solicitation. And hopefully over time, we take more and more of the writing load. I highly recommend, if you think you can afford an upfront cost, definitely scan the QR code and book a meeting with me or with Sasha. For the rest of the team here, before we finish, you can either send questions on Q&A, or you can just raise a hand and I'll give you the permission to talk and ask questions directly if you want. Another question that arises is, why does Eagle Point have to take an upfront cost and a success fee? The upfront cost is not $2,000, I'll be honest with you, but it barely covers our expenses. We try to do a lot of vetting on the companies we decide to work with, because if we engage with a client and we end up not winning within the minimum trial period of 9 months, we hope to work for 18 months and more. If we don't end up winning, then we lose money on working with you. So we try to vet the companies. So we just have a little bit to keep the lights on while we're going for as many solicitations as possible. More questions. So how much do we actually get funded? Who's worth talking on the government side? So Adrian, hey, but besides that, I highly recommend that you read each solicitation. The question is not who is a waste of time, because at the end of the day, it's rare. Agencies have to allocate their R&D budget. If they don't allocate it, then they lose it and they get their budget reduced for next year. So when I say $3.5 billion in R&D funding and 5,000 plus companies get awarded, then these companies pretty much, that budget has to be awarded. The question is it going to be me that's going to get that funding? Or is it going to be my competitor? Or is it going to be somebody else that has decided to allocate the time to actually going after it? Let's see. One second. This is the problem with ADD. Is it practical to look for phase 3 if I have made that much progress? Yes, David. I think it's a case by case, because even if you have something that is now deployable in the market, then you could go for a phase 3. Some agencies have a directive phase 3 or phase 1 and then directive phase 3. So I would highly recommend it. I don't know what's your technology. I don't know exactly what is your situation. So feel free to email me and then see if I can give a better advice. But yes, it's practical to look for a phase 3. Sometimes you might even just want to build a straight prototype for an agency and then move to phase 3. Excuse me. Does that make sense? More hands if anybody wants to either ask questions or just raise your hand if you want to speak out. What is the time for onboarding? Time for onboarding usually takes us about a month to write the first solicitation. Right now, even for companies who want to work on the Air Force, we can't help you right now because we're swamped and the deadline is in less than a month. So we really have to work fast with a client when we have an external deadline. So onboarding time, kickoff call, until we finish writing the first solicitation is about a month. Afterwards, depending on solicitation, the time gets reduced. But the overall formula is within the next 2 years of us working together, the more solicitations we do, the less time we will need from your side. So folks, if there's no further question, this is your last chance before I finish the webinar to scan the QR code and scan the QR code, book a meeting with me if you're interested in doing this. And if we do end up winning together, you'll get an additional month on us. So thank you very much. Have a great day. And I hope I'll get a chance to see you and possibly work together. Thank you very much.